overall, this new generation 8 has left me feeling quite sad, actually quite confused. So stick around and let me walk you through my thoughts. Now, I promise you, I'm not being unnecessarily dramatic or just using provocative statements just to get attention. I've been a Legion fan for quite a while. My first gaming laptop was the Y740, and I've been using all Legion 7s since the 6th generation, even the slim ones. I mean, heck guys, I even got the Legion backpack. What has happened is that Legion has suddenly taken a really different approach to its 7 series, and it's up to you guys to decide if you are in favor of this new change or not. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that, so leave them in the comments below. Would be great to hear from you, and a subscription to the channel would be hugely appreciated. It would keep on encouraging me to take time out of my normal work life and keep bringing you new content. And if you find the content to be useful, a thumbs up would also be great. Oh, and where are my manners? I forgot to introduce you to these guys. So on your right side and on my left side, you'll see the 7th generation of the Legion 7. This is the AMD Advantage Edition, and you can clearly spot that with the orange and red highlights. And then on my right side and on your left side, you'll see the newer 8th generation Legion 7. This is the Nvidia Intel combo. So a lot of the reviews that I see out on the generation 8 are focused on performance and are super positive about its abilities in terms of, again, its performance. Those reviews are mostly about the 4080, 4090 variants, so the top spec ones. So maybe the reason why I'm not shooting out of your screen right now with positive energy about the new generation is because I have the 4070 variant here. So the lower spec one. So you can tell where all of this is headed now, right? I want to compare the 7th generation, the Advantage Edition, with the 8th generation, the Intel Nvidia combo. And on paper, I get it. It's not a fair comparison. Newer is always better, right? But you know what? I'm not so sure about that. I think capitalism has a fun way of distracting us with higher numbers and higher variants while taking value away from us. So what I'm going to see is a comparison of 3 things. So first, it's the 7th generation Legion itself as a device with the 8th generation Legion. The second part is the older hardware. So for example, it's got the 6000 AMD Ryzen Radeon series here, and this one has the 40 series RTX Nvidia GPU, and it has the 13th generation Intel i9 processor actually in comparison to its i7 equivalent, the 6800H here on my left. And of course, it's also a comparison between Team Red and Team Greenish Blue. So if I don't mention an aspect of these devices in this review, it's probably because they are similar, or maybe they didn't get my attention. So I want to share what I found both good and bad, and I want to start off with obviously the outside, just the looks of things. First difference you will notice when you put these two together is in terms of the color of the device itself. They're both gray, but this is a bit darker. Here you'll see like the color of the keys and the chassis of the device, they have the same color, whereas this one has got black keycaps, like almost black keycaps with like a darkened gray. I don't know about you guys, it's a personal preference, but I like darker black keycaps, like a bit of a contrast there. But in terms of physical appearances, I'm afraid it all goes downhill from there. So there's no more an RGB lit logo. You still get the full RGB lit logo on the previous generation, whereas this one, it's not even an option. These lights that used to get lit up on the previous generation, it's no longer there. Instead, you'll see like a little dot there, like almost like a manually milled space for additional LED just to show the charging status. There are no more lights in the vents anymore. You'll still see like the lights in the vents over here, and you'll see, yeah, all the way from the back, you'll see it all there. And at the front of it, this light bar that you see is now only limited to like the front of this device here. It's no longer sort of going all the way to the sides. Now, it is not such a big deal for me personally. I've always been a supporter of understated looks. But the thing is, with the older generation, you always had the option to just turn it off. Personally, for me, removing the lights on these icons here on the back so that it provides you ease of plugging in things is kind of a wrong step. It's one of the most defining features that everyone talks about in the Legion device, and they all praise it. Even if all of this RGB, rainbow, puke thing is not your style, fine, I get that. Not everyone's into that. Personally, I'm not into that as well too much. In my daily use, this is usually all of these additional lights and the vents, they're all turned off. But I have the option to use it if I feel like using it. Like, don't they know that more RGB means more frames? They still did not give this a micro SD slot. The older one didn't have it as well. That premium brushed aluminum look that ran all across the sides of this device is no longer present on the newer generation, or it's been basically replaced with the same material that's on the top and on the back on everywhere else. So now instead we get these additional casings around the vents here. Like, it's got like an almost like an eco-friendly feel to it. It feels rougher than the rest of the device as well. They're not off-putting, but it's just less discreet than the looks that we got on the previous generation, with just like the standard sort of finish on the vents on the side. And this looks neater as well. This doesn't take up the full thickness of the sides. But naturally, I feel like this design decision was made so that it could be given a more robust thermal solution. This device is actually slightly thicker than the old one. The older one had a thickness of 0.76 inches, whereas this one has a thickness of 0.82 inches. And you can see that slight bump in the thickness there on the back, and you'll see this little step up here. Like, it's really slight, but it's there to give it like a thicker cooling solution. You'll also notice that this rear exhaust strip now is basically straight, whereas it used to have like a little dip where the ports were in the previous model. The side profile overall in general is a little bit bulkier, a little bit thicker, almost unrefined at the first look because of that additional vent design. I will say though that this material, I don't know what it is always cool to the touch. So for me personally, progress shouldn't just be making the devices thicker so that you could be given just a little bit more performance. It should be more performance in a thinner form factor. Also, if you look next to the power button in the previous generation, you'll see this sort of gravity field perforation next to it. In the 8th generation, however, it's all gone. It's just like a plain slab. Positive thing about that is that now you have no chance of having any debris stuck in between those holes. But one of the more key features that is lacking in that same region, that in the previous generation you would have the power button which also doubled as a fingerprint reader, which gave you convenient access to your device right from when you booted it up. It used to take a fingerprint and log you right into Windows. In this one though, you'll see the button is now back to normal, like what it was in the previous 6th generation. It too did not have fingerprint login, and it's probably the same button that was used in the 6th generation. Okay, fine, they didn't give you a fingerprint reader this time. Maybe they're being more progressive. They thought, just like Razer, they would give you facial login. And it doesn't have facial login either. It has no convenient login features on this whatsoever. A biometric login feature is more than just convenient. Even if you're in a public space and you've got a simple password, you still have to write it down, right? And hey, listen, if you're more of a person who likes to type in their password, you've got a complex sort of hexadecimal password, you can choose not to use the damn fingerprint login as well. It's there if you need it. But to remove it completely from one of their flagship devices is absurd to me. Yes, I'm getting angry now. Obviously, there was a trend in cost cutting that I observed here, and I thought, what else has Legion been up to? So I started looking for more issues. To my surprise, I found out that this chassis has got noticeable more flex than the older one. The older one is so much more robust. It feels nicer. So listen, for me, this is not such a big deal because I'm not typing with my elbows. Chassis flex, this is still acceptable. It's not a big deal. And this also means that maybe they used less aluminium to make this product. And many will also argue that it's just more environmentally friendly. It's the same thing. It's not bothering you. We're giving you something using lesser materials. I mean, that's up to you if you feel that is an issue or not. But I did want to point that out for those of you who likes to treat their laptops a little bit rough. Also, just reading it off the website, it's made from 50% recycled aluminum in the bottom cover and 30% post-consumer recycled polymers on the top cover. The laptop is clean, environmentally and visually. Legion also introduced force-sensitive WASD keys, means that it's no longer digital. It's like analogs, like triggers on your PlayStation controllers. So the force with which you press your W key, for example, would decide if your player runs or walks. So it was a very cool feature that was introduced last year, and they've got rid of it this year. Now listen, not all of the feature changes are bad. There's been a welcome change in the port selection of the Generation 8. You now get 4 Type A ports in comparison to just the 2 Type A ports that you got in the previous generation. So you get 1 additional Type A port on the right and 1 on the left. In this generation, you had 2 Type C ports on the right and then 1 on the left. Personally, I kind of struggled with this generation because I've always had more peripherals using the Type A interface rather than the Type C interface. So this is definitely more useful and poses as a better desktop replacement. You still get a Type C port on the rear and on the left side as well. The one on the left is the Thunderbolt 4 capable one. It offers you the same functionality as even on the AMD machine, which does not have Thunderbolt, but it has USB 4. In terms of raw capabilities, transfer speeds, Thunderbolt 4 and USB 4 are the same. The port selection on the back is exactly the same, except the Ethernet jack is now upside down. It's a plain gigabit interface and not the gigabit 2.5 interface that you got on the previous Generation 7. Again, personally, I'm not affected because I usually use Wi-Fi. I felt that the screen hinge this time had even less wobble. You can see, like, if I just sort of, you'll see there's a difference in the hinge design this time around. It's more conventional. It's got the 2 anchor points on each side, whereas this one had this bar in the center where they had only the single anchor point on each side. What matters is that when you're typing, the screen shouldn't wobble. And in both of these devices, they both don't wobble. They're both excellent hinges on their own. To the touch, these 2 materials would feel slightly different. Whereas I felt like on this one, it felt a little bit more metallic and a little bit smoother. Whereas this one, it felt like it's maybe the same material, but with a thicker paint job maybe. So it feels more matte. It feels slightly rougher. And you don't get that sort of metallic feel with it anymore. But personally, I thought this device felt just more premium in comparison to the newer generation. Ooh, also in the 8th generation, they've also given you a new boot up animation, like the ROG laptops now do. A good example of how capitalism is trying to distract you. I want to talk about the display. Both of these displays, in terms of their brightness, in terms of their resolution, their screen space, their aspect ratios, their HDR certifications are identical. The one thing that has changed is the refresh rate. This one comes in at 165 Hz and this one goes up to 240 Hz. They both support variable refresh rate as well. The 240 Hz is naturally, for some, could be very useful, especially for those of you, for example, playing CSGO or Rainbow Six Siege, which can actually give you 240 frames a second even at the highest settings. So if you're into those sort of esports titles, by all means, the 240 Hz is a good option. But personally for me, I'm more of a casual gamer. I like story-driven games that do not reach 165 frames a second generally, so I'm perfectly happy with 165 Hz as well. Also, just for reference, both of these devices give you an average of 235 frames on Rainbow Six Siege. Even with the generational gap, they're both giving me the same performance. So moving ahead to sound, and this is an area that I'm usually not that excited to talk about because we're mostly using headphones anyway. Previous generation, I didn't say much about the sound at all. It was just flat and they had nothing interesting to say about it except for the software, the Dynamic software. In the newer generation, they're still using the Dynamic software. It still says audio by Harman on both of them, but when you look at it from underneath, you'll see there's a slightly different sort of angular design on the speaker setup right here. This one was purely just bottom firing and these ones are sort of angled out to the left and to the right, and I don't know what they did. Maybe they changed the speaker rev a little bit, but the sound on this actually is much better than the one on the previous one. This is just fuller and a little bit more richer. You can feel the bass almost when you've got your wrists here. It's got good volume and it's got good depth in the bass as well. So I do want to talk about some software-based enhancements between these devices. In the Vantage software, you'll now see an additional option for your GPU overclock. It'll give you a warning up front. So in a very user-friendly way, you can now adjust the GPU clock offset and the VRAM clock offset through that option in the Legion software. Typically in Legion devices, you get 3 performance mode that can be accessed to that function key shortcut. You've got quiet mode, you've got your balance mode, and then you've got your performance mode. So with a more advanced user, Legion has provided like a custom option within thermal mode setting right here. You can adjust things like how much the fan would ramp up in line with the workloads that you put to this device. You can set thermal limits, you can set the amount of power that's shared between the GPU and CPU, so things of that nature there, and some other complicated stuff that I didn't quite understand. I did personally try the custom mode setting and try to push more power to the GPU as opposed to the CPU when gaming, and I didn't find any difference. Maybe I need to do like a deeper dive on that later, but the option is there if you need it. Another interesting thing I found in the advanced settings was noise cancellation. If you're within meetings, you can decide if the mic should pick up only your voice or multiple voices or all voices. I don't know how it could just pick up my voice because it didn't have like a training software to let it know what my voice sounds like. So I don't know how that happens. It also, and this is something that I really like, it's got a new charging feature. So in the Gen 7, they had what was called a conservation mode for a battery. And what it does was, it would stop charging your battery at 70% so that you can extend the life of your battery overall. So on this one, they've introduced something called an overnight charge feature. And what that does is that it charges up to 70-80% during the day, but when it's nighttime and you leave the power adapter plugged in, it would then only charge up till 100%. So also read about this L82Q AI chip, which is supposed to study your gaming habits and it's supposed to optimize performance going forward. I mean, I haven't had this device for a very long time for me to test it out and see if it has any impact, but you can't find that option anywhere within the Legion software to know that it's actually working in the background, what it's doing. It's just some chip somewhere which does something to improve your performance over the life of your use. For now, I don't have anything to comment on. There is one AI-based setting that you'll find it in the balance mode saying that enable Legion AI engine to automatically detect gameplay and tune the GPU CPU performance accordingly. I also did want to compare sort of Nvidia and AMD in terms of their drivers, in terms of their user experience. And for me, AMD has always been a little bit cluttered and a little bit too nerdy, too geeky, whereas Nvidia provides like a really clean, straightforward interface. You don't have a lot of options right in your face. And overall, this is also widely accepted that AMD drivers tend to be a little bit more unstable and a little bit more inefficient in comparison to Nvidia drivers, because Nvidia has been out there just for longer. But over time, even over the 6 months that I've used it, AMD throws out a lot of driver updates, and each driver update seems to keep on improving performance, seems to keep on improving the stability the system has for me. However, I have to say, despite all that I've said, with this particular Generation 8, there was a whiff of instability about this. And this is something that you also need to consider when looking into the benchmarks that are coming up soon, is that when I was monitoring the power draw for the GPU, it would not go above 100 watts. This is something that I observed at the start of my benchmarking, and because the website says this is supposed to go up to 140 watts, it was of concern to me. So I tried different drivers, I tried different settings, I tried the dedicated GPU mode on, off, the maximum performance mode within NVIDIA control panel. I even went into the BIOS and found an extreme performance setting there. I unlocked that as well, and I still could not get the power limits to reach higher than 100 watts in the GPU, and it's supposed to go above 100 watts. So I even got in touch with both NVIDIA and Legion to help me understand what this is about, because the website says it's supposed to go 140 watts, but they said that the system is working as intended. I even did then a clean reset of the system to see if maybe one of the drivers had a conflict, or maybe some of the updates that Windows had done created an issue with these, but that was again not the case, because I ended up having the same results. So guys, do keep that in mind when we get into the performance and benchmarking sort of section of my video, which is coming right up. Before I do that though, I do want to talk a little bit about the thermals on this. I was already really impressed with the thermals on the Generation 7. It was very cool to the touch. The wrist areas remained cool, keycaps, everything was definitely very manageable in comparison to the other devices that I've used. But in this one, it seems to be even better. And if you look at the thermal cam imaging between the two, you realize that there's like a 560-degree difference just when we look at the part which is susceptible of being the hottest, which is like this forehead area right here. And in this one, it was mostly sort of lukewarm to the touch even after like an hour of gaming, whereas this one was definitely a little bit uncomfortable to the touch. Another thing to point out is that this Gen 7 has a vapor chamber across both the GPU and CPU, and it has a 6700M, which is like the middle model. This one with the 4070 is also obviously their middle model, because you can get the 4080 and 4090 above those. And in this one though, you get a vapor chamber only for the CPU, for this i9 CPU, and not for the GPU. For that, you need to get it equipped with a 4080 and 4090. So as a result, this is also slightly lighter than this one, because the vapor chamber can add a bit of weight to it. When you look at the website, we'll show you images which gives an impression that this is pulling air from the top of the keyboard deck, which is not the case here, both in the Generation 7 and in the Generation 8. So even if you look at my Razer Blades thermal imaging, you'll see cool spots on the keyboard, and that's because it really does pull in air from the top and you can feel it with your hands on the keyboard. This one does not. However, in comparison to the Blade, these are still running way cooler. Just one more thing before I get into the benchmark results. On performance mode, this device genuinely had a much louder fan in comparison to the Gen 7. When you're using these both in balanced mode, the fan noise is kind of similar, though still this sounds a little bit louder. I really had to be careful about using performance mode when there was someone else in the room as well. And even when you're wearing headphones, you can hear the sound of the fans like sort of in the background, so just something to keep in mind. Now, but finally here, let's talk about benchmarks. Now I want to start off with trying to compare both of these devices at an equal footing, so looking at its raw performance. And I must obviously highlight the stark difference between processors here, because this is a 24-core i9 CPU and this is just an 8-core 6800H. So I tested out DirectX 11 performance using Firestrike Extreme in the 3D Mark suite, and I also did the Speedway and the TimeSpy benchmarks to test out DirectX 12 performance on both of these, right? So if we talk about on DirectX 12 TimeSpy scores, the Gen 8 gave me a score of 12,442, and obviously we understand that this is not exactly a fair comparison, so this was going to be obviously lower, but then how much lower? This scored 10,704 on the same test. It's about like a 15% difference, so I was actually expecting a bit more. I thought to dig deeper and referred back to the battery test. I reran the tests, but this time both of these devices were unplugged, and I was quite surprised with the results. So on the Gen 8, the score fell from 12,442 to 4,112. So that's like a 60-70% drop, quite interesting. But for the AMD, the poster chart for efficiency, the score dropped from 10,704 to only 1,799. So that's like an 80% dip in performance. That was quite a surprising result. So let's talk about the other more recent DirectX 12 test, which is Speedway. In that, I got a result of 2,878 on the Gen 8, and then on the Gen 7, I was getting a score of only 1,914. That's like half of the performance that we're getting here. So it just shows perhaps that the newer hardware is obviously going to favor DirectX 12. That's the more recent protocol. But when we talk about performance on DirectX 11, which is still a protocol that quite a few games still use, I was getting a score of 13,423 on the Gen 8, and I was getting the score of 13,552 on the Gen 7. So it's a very similar result for both of them, quite surprising, which just shows that the older hardware, especially in AMD, is going to favor DirectX 11. So that's the raw performance in general. Now let's talk about real world game performance, and I just want to do some housekeeping there. All of the tests were run at a QHD plus resolution, so 1600p with all of the settings all maxed out, right, except where I state otherwise. I had obviously performance mode on, and I was running it on dedicated GPU mode. I did not use any of that upscaling technology from either both AMD or Nvidia, so no DLSS, no FSR. Obviously you get like the frame generation technology in the newer 40 series GPUs, but I wanted to make this comparison as like for like as possible. Also, if there was ray tracing capabilities available in a game, I had also disabled that because we know Nvidia is going to perform better. Let's start off with the famous Shadow of the Tomb Raider. The Generation 8 was giving me an average frame rate of 94, and I was getting 86 frames per second on the Gen 7. That's about 9% less, could have been more. For me personally, that difference could also almost be negligible. Talking about Forza Horizon 5, it's running there in the background. So on the 8th generation, I was getting an average of 92 frames per second, and on 7th generation I was getting, surprise surprise, an average frame rate of 100. So that's again like about 8% better than the performance I was getting on the 8th generation. Considering this is old hardware, this is AMD, Forza could be a game that favors a little bit more AMD than Nvidia. Another thing to keep in mind, these benchmarks you need to take with a pinch of salt because it all depends on the game development process as well. If it favors Nvidia, you'll get more frame rates on an Nvidia, or if it favors an AMD, you will get more frame rates on AMD. Just another thing to point out, that when I did that same test on the Gen 8 with the hybrid mode setting on, I was getting 75 frames. So that's like a big dip from 92 frames, just to highlight the difference in performance that you can get when you switch to the dedicated GPU mode on. Horizon Zero Dawn, a personal favorite game of mine. It's slightly old now, but still it looks pretty good on PC. I was getting an average of 86 frames on this and then an average of 80 frames of this. So for me, that's completely negligible. If I did the same test on the hybrid mode on this, I was getting 69 frames a second. Talk about Division 2. I was getting an average of 79 frames on the 8th generation and an average of 66 frames on the 7th generation. Talking about GTA 5, and I know it's a pretty old game now, so we can expect good performance coming out of it, but it still counts as one of the games that has been played the most ever. So I was getting an average of 140 frames on the Gen 8 and an average of 110 frames on the Gen 7. And I have to point out that GTA 5 is a game that does not have like preloaded presets in it, so I had to manually max out the settings myself. So both of these had the same settings, and that's the result that I got. Now let's talk about Far Cry 6. On the Gen 8, I got a decent score of 82 frames a second on average, and on the Gen 7 with AMD, I was getting 64 frames a second. So that's quite a bit less, about 28% less than the performance here. But still, as I've mentioned before, when it comes to story-driven game, 60 frames a second is more than enough that you need to thoroughly enjoy the game. Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I was getting 65 frames a second on average on Gen 8 and 64 frames a second on average on the Gen 7. So that difference is mostly negligible. Quite an interesting result despite the big difference in hardware. And how can we forget Cyberpunk 2077? It's a game that hugely favors Nvidia. With the ultra settings without any ray tracing, I was getting an average of 50 frames a second on generation 8 and I was getting 42 frames a second on generation 7, and I still think that's a pretty good result considering how much Nvidia is favored by this game. God of War is also a very good looking game on PC, and I was getting an average 60 frames a second on the 8th generation, and on the AMD 7th generation machine I was getting 58 frames a second. So again, that difference is mostly negligible. And I know God of War doesn't have like a benchmark tool inside of it, but I had the same fight sequence loaded on both, and that was the result that I got. Obviously, we should also talk about Modern Warfare 2, and it has a built-in benchmark which gave me a result of 69 frames a second on average for the 8th generation and the same 69 frames a second for the 7th generation. So the same result. That's very interesting to see. And I also do want to talk about Hogwarts Legacy. It's I think the latest game that I ran on both of these machines, and I was getting on average 56 frames a second on the 8th generation, and I was getting 55 frames a second on average on the 7th generation. So that again, that difference is quite negligible. And I have to point out that this game I ran on not the ultra settings but on the high settings, so that's one less. So let's finally conclude the thoughts on the 8th generation of Legion 7. And we understand that obviously Lenovo has gone on a bit of a cost-cutting spree with its 7 series. In return, we are getting better performance and we are getting better thermals and a 240Hz screen, but we are also paying a cost in terms of all the bells and whistles, especially things like the fingerprint reader not being there anymore and less RGB and just the overall premium feel for this device. Right now, towards the end of March and start of April, if I look at Lenovo's website, you would get this for around 2,800, 2,900 Canadian dollars, whereas the 7th generation is obviously discounted and you can get this 6700M with the 6800H at about 2,000 Canadian dollars. So that's like $800, $900 less. And even if you compare this Advantage Edition to the 3070 Ti model, which is obviously more comparable in terms of hardware generation to this, that would still be $300 more than this. It obviously will come down to personal preferences as to what you feel is worth paying for that newer hardware, that frame generation technology, DLSS 3 and whatnot, or do you want to go more for value for money? So personally, for me, I'm more than happy to stick it up with the 7th generation and skip the 8th entirely. So I really do hope that capitalism does not ruin the Region brand further for us. Otherwise, I'm gonna need to become a fan for another brand and maybe get another branded backpack. So guys, thank you all very much for watching my video. If you found the content to be useful, please do like and subscribe. I really do appreciate it. Until next time, thank you. Bye.